everyone, today I wanted to speak about color correction, color grading, color theory, and color blindness. So we have a lot to tackle. So it started off pretty modest. They used to paint everything frame by frame by hand. The people employed would usually be women, and they would paint with really teeny tiny brushes. And then next up was stenciling, and it was by Pathé color, and they would also employ women. Mostly women did these sort of jobs, and they would just stand there all day. The whole process took much less time than it did to tint by hand, so it saved a lot of time and they could produce a lot more of this, but it wasn't very great at archiving. Tinting was another way that they used to apply color, and they would put the film strip itself into a bath filled with dyed gelatin. But the problem with this is that it would warp the sound levels of the soundtrack that was on the side of the strip. So you could tint and tone the exact same image. They would do this to show a really complex story, and there was also a simultaneous action in another narrative within the same movie. It was a way to separate scenes and to separate locations. Technicolor became a really successful way to record film in color because they started doing this 3-strip subtractive color process. What was really hard about Technicolor is that you needed to hire the whole team of people who were trained by Technicolor. So you needed a cameraman who knew how to operate a Technicolor camera, you needed the art department, people who knew how to do the makeup, how to do the wardrobe with the proper coloring that would show up. It was just a huge and long process, and it was really expensive. So they decided a way around that would be to give an animator Technicolor. So they had given it to Walt Disney, and the first one he made was The Flower and the Trees. And the first few films that were really noted as amazing breakthroughs in Technicolor, one of them was The Wizard of Oz. I mean, like, it was just gorgeous, and Gone with the Wind. I'm skipping like a whole chunk of film history. In the 90s, computers made everything so much easier, and the first film ever that was digitally color corrected was Oh Brother, Where Art Thou by the Coen brothers. Color theory is gonna begin with the color wheel. To get a complementary color, it's just a color that's opposite the other color on the color wheel. These ones have the most contrast. They are the same value but a different hue. Using them in combinations will just make each other pop. The thing about color is that whatever culture you come from is really going to drastically affect the way that you interpret that color. Some people think black is classy rather than something associated with death. Some cultures think that white is a beautiful color for a wedding, whereas others wear it to funerals. Some cultures get married in red. So I don't think anyone can really tell you, oh, you can only use this color for this emotion in this scene because that's how it's going to be interpreted. It really depends on who's viewing it. So I think, honestly, just pick whatever color you want to pick. When it comes to color blindness, it is incredibly rare, like super incredibly rare, to just see in black and white. Color blindness affects less than 1% of the female population. If you're a Caucasian male, they usually have about 11% chance. African males usually have about 8%. So basically, some people can't see the color red, or they can't perceive the color green, or both, and they can't differentiate between both of them. I think a lot of people find out that they're colorblind, and then it's kind of like your whole worldview changes, but I think it's totally okay because you don't know what you're missing out on, so I wouldn't worry about that really. And there are so many tools you can use on the computer that could help you find out what you're not seeing, and there are visual representations of what you're not seeing, so I think it's totally fine. But basically, if you add in all the percentages and everything, about 85% of the world's population can see in color. So if you are colorblind and you need some help, you have an 85% chance that someone can actually help give feedback on your shots. So the whole like blue and orange combination, a lot of people don't like it because they feel like it's very cliche. They think it's a color graded look that is applied to every single film out there. I have this theory that since blue and orange are the best color contrast that can be seen universally, even if you are colorblind, maybe that's why they use that look more. And since the film industry is dominated by males in the West, I feel like maybe that could be a really good explanation for why blue and orange is so popular. I don't know, I have this theory and no one's disproven it yet, so. In filmmaking, there are two extremes, and I'm going to really simplify this. Basically, you have realism on one side and formalism. Realism is kind of like documentary style, everything's as real as possible. Lighting is usually available lighting, and it all looks very natural. On the other end is formalism, and you'll find things that are really hyper stylized, in some ways over stylized. And so when you're choosing your color graded look, you can go anywhere on that spectrum. So I open up the video scopes, and the one I use the most is the VECTORSCOPE. This is essentially the color wheel. It actually labels all the colors for you. So if you're colorblind, that's just such a big help. And this is where the skin tones lie. It applies to any skin tone, so I'm going to be using my friend here. Basically, my white balance was completely too blue. I did not realize that. I was in a rush on set. So to correct that, I'm going to launch the midtones into the yellow zone. And I can see on the VECTORSCOPE that they have now moved over to more of the skin tone area. And these are the plus and minus signs, and this is a whole rainbow, so I'm going to take the highlights and minus blue from them. So you can either add color or you can subtract color. The whites look more white, and now I'm pretty happy with how this looks. It's quite desaturated as a look, so I am going to go into my saturation levels and bring up the midtones. And the thing about DSLRs is that they always add way too much color to the highlights, so I always desaturate the highlights no matter what, and I bring down the shadows just a little bit, and in exposure I raise a bit of the midtones. And I'm quite happy with that. My favorite filter to use is a spotlight. I feel like it just adds a bit of extra depth and contrast and a little bit of color and highlight to my character. Usually dim down the amount and I feather it out completely, and I bring the contrast all the way down. And that's what it looks like with and without, and with and without color correction. So I'm going to go into my waveform to see what the exposure is doing right now, because I can tell that the shot is way overexposed. My highlights are way above 75. Usually want to keep them a little bit below 75. I go into the exposure and I'm just going to bring all the midtones down. But now that I've done that, I've lost detail in the blacks, so I bring up the blacks just a little bit, and I'm going to bring the highlights down just a little bit because I'm still not happy with how overexposed the whole thing looks. It's a bit too dim, so I'm going to raise it a bit. So now I'm looking at the VECTORSCOPE, and I like adding just a little bit of blue to the shadows. So I add a bit of yellow to the midtones to get the skin tones properly looking. And then I add a lot more saturation to the midtones. Instead of the vignette filter, I'm going to be using a shape mask to create my own little vignette. I go on the outside of it, and I start bringing down the highlights, and I just stair step it, and I bring down the midtones just a little bit as well. I never bring down the shadows because it will make the image way too dark and not give that subtle depth that I'm really looking for. I'm just going to selectively color the greens in the shot. So I just highlighted all the leaves. I go into my midtones and I just change the green for them. And I'm quite happy with how that looks, but I feel like my midtones look kind of crazy. So I'm just going to go in and dim down the highlights and the midtones just a bit. This is very underexposed, so I have to deal with that, and I'm just going to color correct it first. This is what I have as the final look, so I just stair step the exposure, I resaturated the shot with the midtones, and then I put everything into that range. But the thing about the shot is that it doesn't have the color grading that I want at all, and I wanted it to look like a magic hour scene. So this is the final look of what I wanted, something a bit more romantic, added a spotlight. And I put all the shadows and the midtones into purple to get this look. And I brought down the saturation of the shadows quite a bit because I wanted this faded sort of magic hour-y purple. This shot was all about the contrast of orange and blue, and this is what it looks like with spotlight. And now I'm going to show you an intense amount of work that goes into color grading when you really go all out for a static shot. This won't work for a moving shot. And I have a crap ton of shape mask because I really wanted to selectively control everything, so you can see where all my little shape masks are. And I go on the inside of them and I basically dim down all the highlights, I dim down the midtones, but never the shadows. And I just have them all over the place, as you can see, because I really wanted the emphasis to be on the character, but I wanted enough light to be bouncing around the room so that we could see the posters, because I spent a lot of time designing all of these posters. Like, sometimes you take the lighting as far as you can, but color grading really shoves it into the direction of where you need it to be. That's just the amount of detail that goes into a shot like this. So this is my sister Imani. She was pretty tired. It was very early in the morning. It was during magic hours, so we have all these soft shadows, but the shot is very gray, desaturated, and flat. There's no contrast, and color correction is all about contrast. This is the final look that I wanted, and I'm just gonna run you guys through real quick what I did. I'm just gonna turn all of these things off. I needed to add in all the colors again, so I upped the midtones, and then for the exposure, I brought down the midtones, brought down the shadows as well, because there were absolutely no shadows. I had to add more contrast, so I had to increase the highlights. So it gave it more of a dynamic range with the tonal range. The vignette, it added so much depth to the shot, so I stair stepped it as well with exposure. This is a relatively stable shot, so I could get away with doing this sort of selective color masking, and I created color mask for her hair only because I wanted to give a hair light that looked a bit more red. And now with her face, I wanted there to be a bit more of a spotlight on her face. I increased the highlights within the shape mask just to create the sort of like strobing effect. I added a shape mask to the top of her head and added a lot more highlight to it to remove her bags and make her look less tired. I just selective colored her lips, and I just brought down all the colors within that, so I just desaturated it quite a bit. So I went into YouTube and I downloaded a lens flare / film burn, and I just threw it on top of the image. So it looks kind of like a Lana Del Rey video, and I changed the shadows to be a bit more purpley. And for the film burns compositing mode, I put it to lighten, and that's what it looks like, but I'm still not quite happy with it, so I went in and I raised out the shadows a little bit just to make it a lot more washed out and vintagey. So color correction and color grading can really drastically change the look of your shots, and it can make them look a lot more professional or a lot more stylized and pretty. The really awesome thing about color grading is that it's another character in the film. A really cool thing to check out are color scripts. Pixar has amazing ones in their Art of Pixar books, because you can actually see how the color changes from scene to scene and the color progression of the whole story. I really hope this was useful to you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, and feel free to request any sort of video. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys soon. Bye!